You're good.
Is it on? No.
Sounded like you were.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
I don't think the guys.
Hello? I don't think it's on.
There we go.
All right. If people can please take their seats and we'll get started with the last session, the Sunday morning session of the 11th Annual Georgia Vascular Society meeting. I hope everybody really had a great time. The talks yesterday morning were fabulous. I hope people had a chance to spend either time at the resort or, doing the different activities and the tailgate. I thought the food at the tailgate was great. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you didn't, don't tell me, complain to somebody else. I wasn't responsible, even though I was. I didn't cook it though. I first wanted to announce the sports activity winners. In pickleball, the first place was Pam Lincecum. Did I say that right? Second place was Chris Lincecum, both with Penumbra. I think they were, ringers. The tennis, the winner was Peyton Warren with Angiodynamics. He soundly trounced our family in there, and Nicola and I played against him, and he just trounced us. Shooting clays, the winning team was Zach Martin, Dr. Jonathan Woody, and were they all one team? Dr. Jeffrey Pierce, Minnie Schulte with ProCare Autobac.care, and Chip Sly with Gordon Associates. You're lucky Kevin Urita wasn't around. The highest scorer was Billy Rhodes. In golf, there was only one foursome. They didn't keep score, but they had a great time. So if you guys, who's here, Jeannie has your prizes. All right. So welcome everybody to this Sunday meeting. And we'll start off with our invited guests. But before that, I have a few announcements. The CME evaluation, as you know, will be available at georgiavascularsociety.org/CME. Please fill this out after the Sunday session for the entire meeting. To ask questions with the moderator participation, I thought the live polls as well as the questions were really well handled with Slido, and I think we're going to keep that. The code is GVS 23, and it's in your booklet. The business meeting, the annual business meeting, we held on today, right after the scientific sessions. This really should be a short meeting, so we ask members to stay if they can. The other thing is really, we have a challenge. Please give to the foundation, the Georgia Vascular Foundation, so we can continue our resident and student programs. We try to sponsor the students to come here and present, as well as the residents. So please do give to the foundation, make a pledge by putting your name on the board. And I'd like to challenge everybody to fill that board so we can put a second board up there. The Rosenthal Memorial Lecture Series is coming spring of 2024 in Atlanta. More information to come this fall. Dr. Mark Rudisill has taken over as president of the Georgia Vascular Foundation, and I'm sure he's already thinking of who to invite for that. The save the date for GVS 2024, again at Lake Oconee, September 13th through the 15th. And I want to thank all the sponsors and the exhibitors, and please do visit them at the break because I think it's really important. Their support is really important to this meeting and to allow us to do these sessions and have all the camaraderie. And I think they have. I went around this morning and spoke to all of them. Almost all of them were very happy with what they got out of this meeting so far. Finally, before I give up the podium, I really wanted to thank Liz Sullivan Burkhardt and her crew for all the amazing work they've done putting together this meeting, arranging everything for this meeting, the meals, especially the tailgate. We had a beautiful executive committee dinner and making all the arrangements. So I want to give my heartfelt thanks to you, Liz. Could you stand up, Liz? Everybody else? Anybody else in your group? Please, Joan and Jenny, and I don't know who else is here. But anyway, thank you so much. And you podium over to Jerry Cohn.
Is this okay? Right. Good morning. Well, I was one of the 4 golfers, and although they didn't keep score, I did. I managed not to lose a club. I didn't break a window, and I didn't hit Dr. Jordan or Dr. Pierce. We're going to continue with our wonderful guest speakers here in session 5, and our first speaker will continue thoughts that he alluded to yesterday about innovation. Dr. Snyder is professor of vascular and endovascular surgery at the University of California at San Francisco, and he will enlighten us on why we should be at the forefront of innovation. Oh, could we get, maybe right there. Get it for you.
Is this one work okay?
Yeah.
Great.
There's a pointer and is that okay? Good.
Yeah, I think we're good. Anyway, so, there are a lot of different ways that we can each make our contribution to our field and to those around us. And I guess I'm just kind of still figuring out mine, but I have been interested in these kinds of things. I just putting up this slide as a disclaimer. So if Steve Ballmer, who's like one of the smartest people in the tech industry, could be this incorrect, I could be a little bit incorrect and still be okay. No chance that the iPhone's going to get any market share. I'll bet he regrets saying that. In any event, I do think that we have an obligation to innovate. So our mission as physicians, it includes service and quality and stewardship. We can't go crazy. We have to try to do things in a way that helps the most, but also innovation. And I think, we live in an interesting environment, but could you imagine the skills you've developed now, whether it's with open or endo or computers or how to get your patients in and out? All those skills that you had would not have been possible to use those skills 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. A lot of the skills that we've developed weren't possible to even deploy. So we really are dependent upon what's happening around us. And so what makes me qualified? Well, I have been fascinated with ideas and with the developmental process. And I do think this is what separates us one of the things that separates us from the other species is that we can kind of put a couple things together and create something that wasn't there before. A couple of companies started at my dining table, depending on how you count them. It's been an amazing adventure and I've made lots of mistakes. But my journey started in 2007 when I was doing a tremendous amount of work, hundreds of hours of extra work for my medical group, which was a 650 doctor multi-specialty group, but in the middle of nowhere, which created a lot of challenges. And it was time to change over the leadership of the group. And everybody wanted to know, was I going to put my hat in? I said, no, I'm a vascular. So I don't want to do that. But what I did do is I backed the wrong guy. I backed the wrong person. There were 2 people that wanted it. The other person got it. And so I was really ceremoniously, in front of a lot of people, let go. After putting a lot of work in, I wasn't really enjoying it, I have to say. And I came home and I told my wife, I said, you can't believe, just started in with one of those. And she's like, this is the best thing that ever happened to you. What? Like, just let me complain for a minute. She says, you're always telling me you have ideas. Why don't you do something about that? And so that's what got me going. So I want to be optimistic, but everyone's telling me the world is going to hell. So this is the rational optimist, Matt Ridley. Take a look. He's a UK-based economist, very interesting guy. Today, of Americans officially designated as poor, 99% have electricity, running water, flush toilets, and refrigerator. 95% have television, et cetera, et cetera. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the richest man in the world, in the mid 1800s had none of these. So this all came from innovation, someone's ideas. And I don't know if anybody's read this book. It was very, very popular a few years ago called Sapiens. I would highly recommend it. Yuval Noah Harari, he's a historian, but also a futurist. And, you know, I learned some things there I really did not know. I didn't realize that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted for quite a long time. You know, I don't know how many years, but it could have been thousands. But eventually the Neanderthals died out, and it was partly because they were less capable of abstract thought and innovation. Like they couldn't do stuff together. They couldn't really work together and say, okay, you do this part, I do that part. And we both survived. So it's very interesting. And then this is another one that was quite popular. So I'm just putting some dots up here for us to connect Guns, Germs, and Steel. And this guy, Jared Diamond, is an anthropologist. He's written a lot of books about why societies make it and why they don't, how they fail and why. And he's got these incredible run-on sentences throughout this book. But I'll just say that, you know, over continents, decades, centuries, et cetera, that the societies that were more open to innovation were the ones that were more resistant or more resilient, and that the better ability to have crops and livestock, et cetera, allowed them to survive, to displace, et cetera. So life expectancy in the United States since 1900, you can see a steady uptick. I know it kind of flattened out during the pandemic or possibly slightly before that, but you can also see that as somebody who's age 65 has an 18.5-year life expectancy, according to the CDC. So in 1965, when Medicare was established, there were 18 million people approximately that were over 65. And now we're pushing the high 30 million range to be over 40 in the next 5 to 7 years. So there's a lot of people. But if you look a little further back, you see what world life expectancy was prior to that. So we had superstition, witchcraft, hearsay, moved on to germ theory, sanitation, research, and treatment. But you might not realize this: 2/3 of the people in world history who ever have reached the age of 65 are alive right now, which is not an apology for my age. What it is just saying that we need to innovate, because to be able to continue the ability to treat people and yet have this demographic happening. And just one other thing before I dig in is that I would say that bloodletting was the first vascular operation. It lasted 7,000 years. The idea was to balance the 4 humors. And so because phlegm and yellow bile and black bile were not easy to reach, people would get bled. And George Washington probably died from being overbled. He had a strep pharyngitis with probably Ludwig's angina. I don't know. He apparently had a severe mediastinal infection, and they took something like 8 pints, and he died the next day. And then this is another recommendation I have for you, The Knife Man. This is written by somebody who's really a science reporter, but John Hunter, Hunter's Canal, popliteal aneurysm. Has anybody been to London and been to the Hunterian Museum? You should really, anybody? It's awesome. I see Mike's been there. It's his collection. So he basically spent his fortune running down to the docks when Charles Darwin would come in on the HMS Beagle after these multi-year voyages. He would go down there and get any specimen he could that Charles Darwin didn't want to keep. And he basically spent his fortune. He was the first one to figure out that the placenta and the mother had different blood supply. He was the first one to figure out that oh gosh, so many things. And he vigorously rejected bleeding as a treatment. And this got him basically kicked out of the army, which is, anyway, I digress. So right after bleeding, we had the early days of endovascular, which was cut film, no sheaths. Seldinger technique, as you know, was a double wall puncture. You would go through the femoral artery twice and pull out the trocar from the needle and then gradually back up the needle. In any event, when you look at where we were just a few decades ago, let's say 30 years ago, it really looks different than it does now. And will things change that much in the next 30 years? I don't know. Probably they will. In any event, paradigm shift, I mean, this is like common parlance now, but that term was coined in 1962 by this guy, Thomas Kuhn, who's a sociologist at Columbia, that over time, quotes, anomalies develop under the standard treatment curve that eventually lead to innovations and eventually a complete shift of the curve. But I would say that we've been in a shifting paradigm throughout our modern existence, and maybe every medical field has, but I know this one best. So idea development, each project takes on a life of its own. This is now we're getting into the part of what I think I've learned, or at least as far as I've gotten. But these questions are absolutely essential. Is there an unmet need? Is there a market opportunity? Meaning, if you come up with something, is anybody going to use it? No, not really about markets. It's really about, will people be interested? Is it solving a problem that people have? And can the intellectual property be protected? So what's the value proposition? How are you creating value for anybody? Can you get it down to a sentence or two so it's understandable? And if the answers to those things can be made satisfactorily, then you're off to the races with a prototype, a proof of concept. GLP is good laboratory practices, so preclinical studies, first in human, and then the other things that come after to create a modern product. So moving from unmet need to value proposition is huge. And it's really around that whole idea of, you know, what is the problem that you're solving? What is the pain point, people call it? What is the workaround that people would love to go more directly to solve this issue? And once you sort through that and you start to think about how does this create value, if it makes your case longer, if it makes your day harder, if it gives you a migraine, then no one's gonna be interested in it. And sustainability does require a strategic advantage. And I mean, there are many, many examples of strategic advantages, but I just picked this one sort of randomly because everybody sort of knows this. I mean, the Roman Empire lasted 500 years, not by accident. It's because they built roads so they could get their army there, and they built aqueducts so they could get water to have communities and to nourish the crops. And so if you figure out a strategic advantage for what you're working on, it really does help. And when you think of the scope of the project that you're working on, it could really be a platform, like moving from landlines to cell phones. Or it could be a widget that is, you know, kind of a cool little thing that, you know, maybe solves a little something here or there, and everywhere in between. Like Gore figured out that, hey, this thing's pretty cool for raincoats. And then they moved on from there. So they had a platform. They could make all kinds of things out of PTFE. So intellectual property is very interested, and we tend to focus on this as a group because it all kind of starts with an idea. And the question is, you know, can the idea be protected? But it's really many steps. And when you talk to a patent attorney, it's the most hilarious thing. I mean, they don't even really speak the same language we do. It's like talking to Dr. Spock, and yet it's costing you $1,000 an hour. It's actually kind of fun. But the claims you want are for the thing that makes your idea work. And that's as succinctly as I can put it. And intellectual property in a space where there's been a lot of development can easily take 3 to 5 years. And it has to not have been revealed in a previous, you know, anything. Like the patent examiners, they look everywhere. They Google it, I'm sure. They don't just look in the previously filed patents. But in any event, what you really want to do is to create, ultimately, if your idea is successful, a family of patents that create a sort of a defensive, you know, sort of a fence around it that gives you what people call freedom to operate. So if you look at intellectual property, and some of these are famous battles about who owned what, is very interesting. But some of the things that have been important in our history, the steam engine, the elevator, the light bulb. I mean, the elevators were invented by Egyptians. They just didn't have safety brakes. I guess workers were more expendable in those days, but Otis invented the safety brake, so he's credited with the whole thing. And it's all very interesting how, the Wright brothers weren't the first. They just added an engine and some steering, which really helped. Nevertheless, this is a great book if you haven't looked at it. And, we think of it as such a no-brainer at this point. But what the two brothers went through to get their idea, they actually ultimately went to France and talked the French government into backing their idea as an aeronautical advantage for the French army before the United States. Different business concerns and government got interested. So the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. So this was the president of Western Union who, passed on the telephone. He had his chance to buy the telephone for a small amount of money, apparently, and he passed because he just didn't see it yet. And this is my way of telling you that a lot of times things that end up being really, really important start out looking like maybe not very sophisticated and not very good ideas. And there's this guy called Clayton Christensen. He's a business school professor at Harvard, and he's the one that coined the term disruptive technology. And he explains it very clearly in this book, which is a seminal work in the business world. But it's new technology that unexpectedly displaces an established one. It often looks like a bad idea at first, and it very often serves a part of the market that was previously ignored. And when you look at disruptive technology on that upward curve there, I mean, no matter how much money you put into cars that are getting 8 miles a gallon, at some point, you're going to have to move on from that. And eventually the auto industry did. And there's so many examples of things like that, things that started out looking, what are we going to do with that thing? Think of the first, Toyotas that you saw on the road or something like that, that now, I mean, you can't even imagine not having the ability to have a reliable economy car. So once you've got the proof of concept, you can move, to R&D and then first in human trials. The cheapest route to proof of concept is usually the best. So it might be rigging some things together in the garage to just see if you can possibly produce the effect that you want, and to do as much preclinical modeling as you can, whether it's finite element analysis or benchtop or cadaver work, and of course, the potential for animal lab. And then there's the prototype, which means getting engineers involved, the analysis of the manufacturing process. I mean, even if you can make what it is you're talking about, can you make it for an acceptable, cost, a cost of goods, if you will, and then the validation testing. And the first in human is absolutely fascinating. It's rarely done in the United States. Maybe you could argue never done because of the typically because of the medical legal issues and regulatory issues. But first in human studies are done in many countries throughout the world. I've gotten to do surgery in somewhere around 10 different countries at this point, and it's absolutely fascinating because you get a look under the hood into how things work in different hospitals around the world. And these first in human studies are really essential. And frequently after a first in human trial, obviously you've done everything you can short of putting it into a person, it very often leads to some improvement in the device. So who are the players? It's really just like when you went to medical school, and you could kind of tell after a month or two who are going to be the orthopedists and who are going to be the neurologists. And it's almost the same, but there's a whole ecosystem of people out there that do these different functions, and they're really different. Even talking to your IP attorney is really different than talking to a corporate attorney, for example, that's helping you set up the startup or whatever you're working on. In any event, the financing typically starts with family, friends, and angels. Many communities, most metropolitan areas in the United States, large ones have angel groups, which are typically people who've had their businesses and now they're interested in developing other businesses in the community. Family offices have become important, and investment funds, venture capitalists, et cetera. The venture capital thing is interesting. They get a bad rap, but if you end up working with a venture capital firm, they typically have deep layers of content knowledge and expertise that really can help what you're doing. So, and financing is kind of like blood supply for ideas. And this is what it feels like. You know, it's like that Chutes and Ladders if you ever played with your kids. It's like you get one move forward and then all of a sudden you're back to the beginning again. But the investor mindset is really important to have in mind, in that angels are investing in the community. A lot of times family offices, they have some altruistic thing involved. They may have had a family member that had cancer or had some medical problem. The strategics are definitely interested, the larger companies, because they want to get an early look at these things. And then venture funds. The venture funds, like I said, they have this deep content knowledge, but they're also fairly narrow in terms of what they're interested in and what they invest in, and also the amount they want to invest. Like, they're not going to invest a tiny amount of money because they have to do the same due diligence on what you're doing as if they're going to invest tens of millions. So many of the things I've worked on have been lower than what venture capital people were interested in investing in. And just a little bit about regulatory, surgeons, I would say in general, are really, really good complainers because we're super smart. We can analyze the data and we can formulate an argument that allows us to complain vehemently. And the FDA gets a lot of complaints from us about why is it this way and not that way, et cetera. But they actually have some method to the madness. They've got these different, risks to the patient, basically 1, 2, and 3. And most of the stuff we're interested in is it's either going to be a type 2, like something that you put into a patient and take out, like an angioplasty balloon, or a type 3 is something you put into the patient and it stays in, like a stent, just by example. And you can see what this process looks like. For me, I enjoy the first part the best, the proof of concept, the prototyping, and kind of figuring out, okay, what do we do? What's our pathway to make this thing happen? The other things really require a lot, different kinds of expertise, to design, for example, a pivotal study or a market launch or a post-approval study. But nevertheless, you can see what the costs of those things are. A feasibility study for a device, 10 million, pivotal trial can easily run tens of millions. And these are just those two classifications, the 510K, which means that there is something out there that's a predicate that is a substantial equivalence. Like, we've seen something similar to this before. And then there's this PMA, or pre-market approval. This takes typically a few years. These are what the approvals look like. On the left-hand side, you can see what the numbers look like for 510K approvals. So somewhere around 2,500, 2,800 in the United States each year. And then the yellow line is the number of PMAs. You can see they're only like 40 versus 2,800. So that PMA pathway is much more challenging. But the clinical trial, it's like the operation game. When I see a negative clinical trial, my heart just sinks, because these people have put blood, sweat, and tears into the thing. I was talking about the Saval trial yesterday, but the cost of these things is $30,000 to $50,000 per patient for a properly done pivotal trial in the United States. So, I mean, in my formative years, I probably ended every talk I gave by saying, well, obviously, we need more data, like a prospective randomized controlled trial. But I didn't know I was asking for something that was tens of millions of dollars to make happen. And this is what it costs for a 510K approval. Typically, these data are more than 5 years old, so it may be different now. But a typical 510K is 31 million, and most of those are FDA-dependent costs, and a typical PMA is 94 million. And most of those are FDA-dependent. And you can see the time it takes. The average is more than 8 years. So not for the faint of heart. Nevertheless, the regulatory pathways are so interesting, and you'll notice that for example, drug-coated balloons were available, 8 years before we had them. They were available in Europe, which is a sophisticated medical environment. EVAR was, 10 years from first report to approval. Carotid stent, same thing. Percutaneous aortic valve. You get the idea. So for these more extensive projects, 10 years is not unusual. There are a lot of unforeseeable external circumstances that really change the ability to finance these things. The dot-com bust, 2008 financial crisis, Affordable Care Act had a specific device tax in it, which chased away a lot of investors, paclitaxel and COVID. And you can see what how COVID affected these different things by looking at these bars are the amount invested in medical development. So I'll just close with where I think things will go. It's just my own opinion, but things that cut costs or manage chronic disease, digital health, wearables, implantables, data management, anything that helps convert inpatient to outpatient, disparities, software solutions, support current trends, like, for example, home dialysis. And of course, anything that you can claim has AI capabilities. But cans you probably know this, but cans were invented in 1810, but a can opener wasn't invented till 1870. So for 60 years, they had to open cans using rocks, knives, chisels, hammers, etc. Just thought you ought to know that. Some really important and smart people lived during that era, and they had to use rocks and knives. So in any event, in my opinion, we have an obligation to innovate. We start by assessing the unmet need. If there's no unmet need, there's no point in going down that road. And it's a developmental process and actually quite an adventure. And there's I would say, although each thing has its own personality, each project, there is a way to do it. And I think physician contribution to this process is absolutely essential. It's potentially wide-ranging, and I think we need more of it in our field. So my opinion. Thank you.
Really great talk, particularly on a topic that we don't, even though we're in a field that leads in innovation, we don't hear a lot about. And so next up, we have Dr. Quinones Baldrich, who will talk to us about the uncertain future of vascular surgery.
Thank you very much. Listening to what it costs to do all these studies and, the innovation and so on, reminded me of a story. When my son joined an investment company, I told him, I'm going to put together a little bit of money and give it to you guys so you can manage it. And he says, that sounds great, Dad. Minimum investment is 95 million. And I said, that's going to take a little time. Anyway, talking about son, my stepson actually used to work for Tesla, now works for GM. He's an engineer. And he has access to artificial intelligence. So what I did is I gave him a series of questions and I said, could you put this through the AI, ChatGPT or the OpenAI? I don't know which one it is. And I said, ask him which specialty will be treating vascular disease in 10 to 20 years. And it said the landscape of vascular care is evolving, traditionally managed by vascular surgeons. The push towards minimally invasive intervention has involved interventional radiologists and cardiologists more prominently. And I add CT surgeons, general surgeons, vascular medicine, neurosurgeons, neurointerventional radiologists, and others. And it said this multidisciplinary approach is exemplified in academic and comprehensive vascular centers worldwide. Continuous training and hybrid training programs for vascular surgeons to become proficient in endovascular techniques are indicative of the changing landscape. So you get the idea of what's going on is all these other specialties have discovered the vascular system and now they want to treat it. So how do we deal with that? Well, for me, I want to talk about aortic, carotid, and peripheral vascular, but it affects all of these areas, particularly venous disease, venous access. I mean, right now, who does the venous access? It's usually an MP or a PA that that puts a line. We rarely get called anymore to do any lines. So everything is changed significantly. For me, it actually changed back in 1992. For me, that was a pivotal event. When we did the first endovascular AAA graft in the West Coast. And there's Dr. Wesley Moore, and my hair was a lot darker then. And I always told residents, never cross your hands when you're operating. So we looked at our experience at UCLA between 1999 and 2009. And what you can see is with the open, the mortality actually decreased, but the mortality with EVAR was extremely low, 1%. And even though we've been doing then more complex open procedures, we still had a pretty decent mortality. I'm not sure that stands today because the complexity of the open repairs in many centers is very significant, and therefore the mortality, I think, is a little bit higher in the open, but the EVAR has remained pretty low, and that's an important consideration. So the aortic disease, we know it can progress and it can lead to stent migration, endoleak, secondary interventions, and sac enlargement. And I would submit to you that the majority of the mechanical issues that occur with the endovascular repair of aneurysms actually have been resolved. A lot of these are very rare now. And if you look at the long-term failure of endovascular grafts with the Ancure tube graft repair, it was obvious there, very few aneurysms have a neck above the bifurcation. The Anurex graft migrated almost in all cases, even though they came up with the idea that the neck was elongating instead of the graft migrating. The gore permeability issue was resolved. The Endurant early limb thrombosis was resolved. The Endologix fabric failure has been resolved. And I'm not sure about the suture type 3 endoleaks. I think that is still something that we are concerned about. If you look at these couple of cases that I did conversions on, this is what you find, which is this sprinkler lookalike extravasation of blood at the point of sutures of the stent graft to the fabric. So after I saw a couple of these, before converting, I would reline the grafts, and that actually solved about 60% of those endoleaks that I had difficulty treating. When we look at survival, there have been some work done that suggests that the survival long-term is better with the open procedure, but you can see that the differences are relatively small and occur very far out from the index intervention. So the question that I would pose is that really an important change? Is that really an important finding? And I would submit to you that for most patients, that small difference in long-term survival is not as critical as getting out of the hospital the next day and not having a big incision. Now, if you're seeing a patient with 50, 55-year-old patient, then I think this becomes a relevant issue. So this improvement in survival with the open repair seems to be real, but it's relatively small. I'm sure you all saw this, as we all subscribe to the journal Cytokine. But they actually published these findings they looked at patients with and without sac growth, and it turns out that patients after endovascular repair that have sac growth have increased inflammatory markers, which may explain why patients with increasing sac growth tend to have higher mortality and higher cardiovascular events. So I would suggest that the biology of the endovascular repair is not something that we fully understand, and I think it deserves further study and evaluation. You can see here that the expanding aneurysms had increasing inflammatory markers. So I think that there's been a significant push by patients, physicians, and industry towards the endovascular approach because it's less invasive, has better early results associated with the procedure and the physician. However, late results are associated by the patient with the pathology and not the procedure of the physician. And this is the reason why these small differences in survival between open and endo, in my mind, are not as critical, except when you're dealing with a very young patient. So, as I said, the biology, Ivar, I don't think is well understood. So if we look at endovascular aneurysm repair, who's doing it? Well, I can tell you that there are a significant number of cardiologists that now do endovascular AAA repair. They'll send you the patient when the patient has an endo leak and they can't figure it out. So in this, I Googled, do cardiologists treat aortic aneurysms? And this was what came out of that search. Patients with a new diagnosis of thoracic aneurysm should be referred to a cardiologist with expertise in managing aortic disease, or to a cardiac surgeon specializing in aortic surgery, depending on the initial size of the aneurysm. So you can see that the first referral is not to a vascular surgeon or to a cardiac surgeon, but it is to a cardiologist. And I suggest that if the cardiologist has means of treating that, they will treat it and not necessarily refer the patient further. If you look at what's happening with repair of open repair of abdominal aortic aneurysms, this was a study that was published in 2020, and the conclusion was that exposure to open aortic repair in vascular surgery programs had dramatically increased to nearly 1/2 of senior trainees performing fewer than 5 open aortic repairs in 2014. So this created obviously growing concerns about the competence of trainees in complex open repairs. There was a follow-up study that actually was published looking at the open repairs by 2020, and now they find that vascular trainees complete 1 to 3 open repairs during their training. So this is an issue that we need to deal with as vascular surgeons, because we're really the only ones that approach aortic disease with open surgery. So somehow we need to figure out how we're going to get people trained in this kind of intervention. So I asked my stepson to look at how will aortic aneurysms be treated in 10 to 20 years. And you can see that it basically said the popularity is backed by studies of the endovascular repair with a reduced short-term morbidity and mortality compared to traditional open repair. And it's stated open abdominal and thoracic aneurysm repair has been the traditional approach. The long-term durability of open repairs is well documented. However, the rise of EVAR and TVAR, the preference has shifted. So there's no question that endovascular approach to aortic pathology is on the rise, and with increasing technology or improving technology, you're going to see that most of these aortic pathologies will be at least first approached with an endovascular intervention. So if we move to carotid disease, we asked artificial intelligence, how will carotid disease be treated in 10 years? And the answer was that endarterectomies was the primary treatment option for symptomatic and certainly asymptomatic and certain asymptomatic carotid stenosis. However, carotid artery stenting is less invasive, and trials such as CREST have compared the efficacy. And as of 2021, the results suggest comparable outcomes for both methods in certain patient populations. So now we are basically saying, you know, you can either have an open carotid endarterectomy or you can have a stent. So recently I received this email, and most of you probably received this email to basically make comments about the application to CMS to reimburse transfemoral percutaneous transluminal angioplasty of the carotid artery with stenting. And this was an application for both patients that were symptomatic greater than 50% or asymptomatic greater than 70%. The application was submitted by a multi-specialty carotid alliance. So I actually said, who is that? So I Googled that. And a multi-specialty carotid alliance is a group of medical experts from the relevant specialties associated with carotid artery disease, which includes neurology, neuroradiology, neurosurgery, interventional radiology, vascular surgery, vascular medicine, and interventional cardiology. So basically what we're doing is and this is gonna, I believe it's been approved. There's still comments that are being requested, but this is gonna open the floodgates for other specialties to intervene in carotid artery disease without really increasing the population of patients that need intervention. Now, my cynical mind will say, you know, some of these specialties, they also do the duplex scan. So you wonder if all of a sudden there's going to be a lot more 50% carotid stenosis hanging around in patients that are asymptomatic and they're going to get treated. I can tell you that I had a patient that I was following with the carotid stenosis after I did his aneurysm. I was following, you know, a 50–60% carotid stenosis, totally asymptomatic. And he came to see me on a follow-up visit for his aneurysm follow-up. And you know, we're talking and he says, you know, doctor, I am so grateful. My cardiologist saved my life. And I said, oh, how did that happen? And he says, he did some ultrasound and he found this carotid plaque. And he told me that the next week we were going to take care of it. So he did. He put a stent on my carotid. And, you know, here I am cultivating this carotid patient. And a cardiologist went ahead and put a stent in it. So I suspect that the floodgates for this are going to be opened. And, you know, we'll see what ends up happening. Now, what is on our side? Well, I think TCAR is something that has come up. And to be honest, it's probably the best way to put a stent in the carotid. Now, if you ask me, is that preferable to a carotid endarterectomy? Again, I think if it were my carotid, I would find a surgeon that can do a carotid endarterectomy. I don't want a piece of metal in my carotid. It's kind of interesting to me, and I don't know much about how duplex scans are evaluated, but if you look at how carotid stents are followed with duplex scan, the criteria for recurrent stenosis is different. So why is that? I don't know. I think there's always a little bit of residual stenosis there. And I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, but I have seen patients after carotid endarterectomy 10, 15, 20 years later, and they're still doing fine. So what I suggest is that this is going to be the way to put a stent in the carotid. And for now, since it requires a cut down, I think vascular surgeons have a little bit of a step ahead. But don't be surprised if in a few years, we're going to see percutaneous transcarotid stenting. I would suggest that we all get trained and learn how to do TCAR, because otherwise you're going to be staying behind. If all you do is carotid endarterectomy, that patient may go elsewhere, or the cardiologist may do a transfemoral stent now that they're going to get paid. Some years ago, a friend of mine, Frank Criado, I don't know if you know of him, but he was one of the early adapters of endovascular interventions. I mean, he was very aggressive with endovascular. And he told me, when you see a steamroller coming towards you, either get on it or become part of the road. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think we better accept that endovascular interventions are the future of vascular surgery, and we need to become really good at it. So if we look at peripheral vascular disease, we ask artificial intelligence, how will PVD be managed in the next 20 years? And it's the same thing. Medical treatment, risk factor modification. But the surgical options like bypass surgery have been long-standing treatments, or when less invasive methods are ineffective. However, minimally invasives have been increasingly favored. Drug-coated balloons and stents are evolving areas within this domain, which has shown benefit in terms of patency rates. So we know about the Basel II and the best CLI. What was interesting in the Basel II is that 87% of the endovascular interventions were done by interventional radiologists. In the best CLI, yeah, an intact saphenous vein, distal bypass is better. But how many intact greater saphenous veins do you think we will have in a few years with all the venous interventions that are happening? They're getting ablated, they're getting destroyed to treat varicose veins, which are really usually not very severe or symptomatic. So I'm not sure that we're going to have a lot of greater saphenous veins around. So keep that in mind. So I think the other issue here is how many surgeons are trained to do bypass surgery. You know, with all the endovascular interventions, I can tell you, even in our center, when I was working at UCLA, I used to do, when I was in my younger years, I used to do 2 to 3 tibial bypasses a week. And now they're probably doing at most 1 a month. So I'm not sure that we're going to have in 10, 15, 20 years, surgeons that can do an adequate distal bypass. And we all know about this, 12 million Americans with peripheral vascular disease. And the providers are cardiologists, interventional radiologists, vascular medicine, and vascular surgeons. And this, you know, brought it to the surface. And mainly the issue here is that you have a huge financial incentive with interventions done in PVLs. When you pay $10,000 per atherectomy, it's hard not to give in and at least do 1 or 2 atherectomies in the patient before you do anything else. We're all human beings, so we're all tempted to do this. So there are a bunch of $3 to $17 million a year to numerous providers that are paid for this particular issue. So I suggest to you that this huge financial incentive needs to be tempered down. Otherwise, we're going to keep seeing this. And, you know, we all say, well, yeah, it's cardiologists and it's radiologists. And you know what? There are also vascular surgeons that are doing this. We're all human beings, and we're all in that sense tempted to behave in that manner. So there's reasons for the endovascular effort in peripheral vascular disease. Again, it is less invasive, and the results are pretty good early on. Now, it may be that the patient needs to come back in 6 months, but the patient doesn't have an incision. If you have a bypass that fails in 6 months, the patient is really, really angry. But if you have a peripheral intervention that fails in 3 to 4 months, the patient just says, you know what, doc, let's keep doing it because I felt really good at the beginning. So the results are associated with the procedure and the physician, and it's less invasive. But late results, again, are associated with the pathology. And if you look carefully, you have patients and physicians and industry that are pushing this. And industry actually is pushing it, not only to vascular surgeons, but is pushing it to all specialties that can do interventions. And who can blame them? So if we need to start shaping the future of vascular surgery, we need to learn and develop, and like Peter says, be involved in the innovation of complex EVAR, TVAR, BVAR, and FEVAR, transcarotid stenting, tibial interventions, venous endovascular interventions, creation of hemodialysis access, endovascular visceral artery interventions, endovascular technology that you can incorporate into open surgery. And most importantly, I would suggest that we really concentrate on the endovascular and open rescue of failed endovascular interventions, conversions after endovascular AAA repair. I never had a conversion of a FEVAR on a BVAR, but I would suggest to you that's going to be a very challenging area in open aortic surgery. So we need to learn to treat the complications of endovascular interventions. So how do we get involved? Well, I would suggest that we mentor high school students, whether they're in minority programs or not. I used to have a minority high school student program that I participated, and I can tell you, it's one of the most rewarding things that you do. Because these kids are like sponges, you know, when you talk to them, you know, they're like your kids, except they listen. So we need to get involved with medical students. The vascular club is an important component of getting young people to get interested and learn about vascular surgery. With the surgical residents, we need to be involved in the journal club, in the mock orals, attend grand rounds, so that they see that we enjoy our specialty. And we need to be involved in research and development of vascular technology. So what does it take to have a successful practice? And this is for the young members of this audience. I was told when I was a very young resident in my first few years that the key to a successful practice is the 3 A's, and it's affability, availability, and ability. And they go in that order. I observed surgeons that were not that good surgeons, but they were super nice people and they were available. You called them, they were there right away. So they had a good practice. On the other hand, there was one surgeon that was an expert technical surgeon, but I watched him do a consult for a patient with a breast lesion, and he called the referring oncologist and started reaming him on the phone that, why are you ordering in those days, a bone scan, a liver scan, and a brain scan? This patient has a very small, and he started arguing with the oncologist. Not a good way to do it. And I think I heard this earlier about how vascular surgeons complain. I would suggest you keep your complaints to yourself until they can make a difference. It was Julie Freischlag in her presidential address in 2014 that said, be nice. You know, let's be nice. Let's be nice to our patients. Let's be nice to our colleagues. Let's be nice to our residents. And as I mentioned yesterday, enjoy caring for patients one at a time, because it is a big privilege. If you learn to enjoy that part of what we do, everything else is going to feel much better. You know, I used not to like clinic until I started listening to patients, until I started, you know, enjoying the fact that they're telling you their story. They're you know, laying it all out, and it is a big privilege. So the uncertain future of vascular surgery, we just need to remember that the future is always uncertain. But I think we have a role in our generation, or in this time of vascular surgery, to recognize what the field looks like and to take advantage in every way we can. And finally, I know I will see you sometime in October. Go Dodgers.
Thank you, Dr. Quinones Baldridge. By the way, if I could have your stepson's number, I could use a magic 8-ball for some of my clinical uncertainties. Moving on, we're going to hear from really a consummate leader on learning how to do hard things as a leader. Joining us again on the podium is Julie Freischlag, who we know is the CEO of Atrium Health at Wake Forest and the Dean of Wake Forest Medical School.
Thanks so much. I think the first two talks really have sort of framed where the specialty is. And it's not that we're this only ones. When you look at other interventionalists and general surgeons and plastic surgeons, everyone is looking at how best to propel their group to where they want to go. And then put on top of that, the finances, the employment models, the way you practice, how it's changed for those of you that have been in practice for a long period of time. How does that look? And how do we go forward with that? And I guess today, I really want to tell you that I really think all of you possess incredible skills to go take care of where healthcare is going as well as your patients. You're able to look at a patient and tell them you can't help them. You can tell them that they died on the table. You can tell them that you have to redo that operation. And sometimes you just met them. And you're able to deliver bad news in a way that's caring and concerned. You're also smart. You can make quick decisions at that OR table and pivot when you have to. And the other thing that you do very well is in that OR, as I mentioned yesterday, there's, anesthesiologists and nursing and techs and industry, and you're able to orchestrate that whole symphony to get something done. And the more dicey it is, the better you are. If it's urgent emergent, you get it going fast, to make it happen. And at the same time, as I showed yesterday, we have an obligation to teach that next generation and to be able to run that OR like a symphony. Armando Giuliano, who is a breast surgeon at UCLA, used to really talk about that's where you perform, and that's where you leave your mark. And I so agree with Bill. Again, people will remember all the rude and awful things you say. They probably won't remember all the nice things you say to do it. But you do need to make those decisions. So this is a picture of me in the OR with Ashley, who's our new younger partner to do it. And she, at that time, was 7 months pregnant as we were finishing that operation. In the middle is the Moravian Star. It sits on top of our hospital. We're founded by the Moravians, and we light that up at holiday time, but we had it lit up a lot during COVID because you all have been through a lot during COVID. Your trainees, your families, I heard somebody as I walked in yesterday said he had just gotten COVID a couple of weeks ago and was sick as a dog. It's still around to make that happen. And then I think we need to focus though on the right, because lucky us, we have this amazing relationship with patients who trust us, who talk to us, that always get a hold of us over a period of time. And the one story I'll start off with is years ago when we did that small aneurysm trial, we were doing it in the VA. I was in Milwaukee then. And the first patient my partner did, it was all open surgery for that trial, got right into the duodenum. So they opened up a small hole in the duodenum, first randomized patient. And we decided to go ahead and do the open repair, put the omentum over, and of course, tell him to take Keflex for the rest of his life. That was our plan to do it. And that was in 1995. So after I was at Milwaukee, I moved to UCLA for 5 years. Then I went to Hopkins and I was there in 2007. And I get a call from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And it's this guy. Okay, so here we're, how many years? We're 12 years after his aneurysm repair. And of course, I know his name because I know the hole in the duodenum. I don't know all my patients' name, but I remember that guy. And he was up seeing a new internist who wanted to stop his Keflex. And he said, "Oh, Dr. Freischlag said I'm never supposed to stop this." And he goes, "Well, you need to stop it." And he goes, "Well, call her." And he goes, "Well, she won't answer." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, she will." He's followed me from Milwaukee to LA to Hopkins and rings my office. So I got on the phone. He's doing great, 12 years out. So I talked to this young internist. I said, "Do you want to be the guy that stops the Keflex that costs, I don't know, 63 cents a day and then he dies tomorrow, you don't do it. So those patients really trust you and they will find you. Now, again, I have a weird name too, so maybe he was able to find me easier, but that guy lived another 3 years, to do it. And he knew I'd answer the phone. So I quoted Maya Angelou yesterday, but I think the most important single thing belong discipline and creativity, which is you, very disciplined, but as creative as heck, right, to do it. And you heard about that from Peter, being innovative, if that's your thing. You heard it from Bill, being as skilled as you can and be part of the game so you are relevant in your practice. And then daring to dare, say, could we do it differently? And we've always done that. We've always done that, whether it's endovascular, whether it's conservative therapy. The best thing about our field is there's so many options for our patients. And if you look at the 05 training program, it is #2 choice for medical students in the country, only second to plastic surgery. And I'll tell you, in another year or two, it's going to be #1 because it's a 05, because it also affords you many ways to treat those patients, right? And you know them for life. They're always there. They're going to call you from the Upper Peninsula to see what you're doing. And the other thing is the people going into the 05 are very diverse, 40% women and many and underrepresented in medicine. So this core little graph that you see here is really a graph about reactions and behavioral health symptoms of disasters, okay? And this one happens to be about from substance abuse, but if you look at this is sort of what happened with COVID, right? And I was quoted saying, oh, I don't think COVID's going to be much. It's going to stay in the state of Washington. Don't worry. And boy, was I wrong, to do it. Because we were listening to it before it came. Then it crashed on us. I was at Yale giving a talk and was headed home through Charlotte, and everybody's washing their hands. This is like the end of February, beginning of March. And then within 2 weeks, we had shut down everything, right? And we even wrote about it. How did you shut it down? We didn't know, right? We didn't know. Remember, we didn't even know whether you should be wearing masks or not. Remember, we had all that discussion. We didn't have any stuff. Now we have tons of stuff. I have more gloves and masks. I think I can outfit you for 5 years now because we never used to keep it. Why bother, right? And then we actually had some disillusionment. It kept coming back. And even now, we thought this year would be great. COVID's gone. But now finances are horrible, right? We have inflation. And if you want to really feel better about ours, I'm on the Aga Khan board for their healthcare system. That's where we have hospitals in Nairobi and Karachi. Their inflation rate in Nairobi is 35%, and in Karachi, it's 62%. It's horrible. And they never even could get vaccines. And we also have no staff. We're trying so hard and we're slowly getting ours back, but we're going to have to come up with some AI models for staffing too, because we're not going to be able to do it the same way. And even for these clinical trials, I was just talking to Ben about that. We're going to have AI run these trials, and we can do that. We're going to work on that so you can use the EMR to do it. But now here we are. And what can we do in this reconstruction? So resilience, we thought, when I trained was to, work 110 hours. You heard Arun mention you're going to miss the cases every other night if you go home. We had a pyramidal program where they cut 19 of us to 6. And the way we found out if we had a job is we had a mailbox. So for the younger ones, it wasn't your phone. It was a wooden structure where they put an envelope in it, okay? And if you were kept, you got a blue letter. And if you were fired, you got a white. And everybody knew. And at my dinner, there were 7 of us to 6 spots. And they told one guy they really weren't quite sure about him anyway. So, but he made it. It was a different time. So when you look at resilience, I wrote this article when I gave a talk for the American College of Surgeons about really bouncing up. So with this COVID thing, enhancing your resilience, looking at your full potential, helping others grow, similar to what Bill just said with the new generation. You saw my video yesterday. Put your humanity into action. And I really appreciate him mentioning be nice, because people thought my talk was a little radical years ago, but being nice is really important. And it also makes you feel better too. So in case you can't see me here, I'm wearing red. So I was chair of surgery at Hopkins for 11 years, and I was the only woman chair during that time. There's some very famous people there. There's the dean at Stanford standing there, the previous EVP of Emory's in that picture, the dean of Iowa, great people. There's not much diversity except for the chair of Durham, who's up on the upper right. But I learned a lot. It was a really hard job for the first 3 years of really going against tradition, trying to figure out what's best for everyone, looking at how we take care of patients. And the year I showed up, it was the 80-hour work week, timeouts in the OR, and RVUs. And everybody thought it was my idea. So off we went at Hopkins to do that. And the best story there when I got there was when you had to, we had 3 wrong site surgeries the first year I was there. And I went into the ORs, we had 3 ORs, three different sites at the main hospital. And I said, okay, so how come these surgeons aren't coming in to do their timeout? And they said, well, we got this list. What list? Because we got these lists of people that, you know, they're too famous, they're too busy to bother. And I said, am I on that list? They go, oh, no, you're not on that list. I'm only the chair of the damn department. Okay, so here I pulled that list out and I tore it up because there should be no list because those patients are much more important than that list to make it happen. It was a piece of paper, which again, young people, you don't understand that, but it was a piece of paper. We ripped it up and there was no longer any list. So how do we go through post-traumatic growth, which I think you're doing? Most of us thought 2008 was bad. That was financial disaster and all sorts of issues. And we didn't have a bottom line. And I remember going, oh my God, I'd been at Hopkins for 5 years and we were doing so well. And all of a sudden there was no money, right, to do it. But now this is different. You know, this is different as we go forward. So if you can really focus on this post-traumatic growth and realize everyone's in it. So COVID-19 has been an equalizer, right? Everybody could get it. It's made mental health more visible for all of us because it's really affected your kids, it's affected your spouse, it's affected your friends to do it. And it really has been a great equalizer. And COVID-19's done a lot of good stuff for us, even though it's done a lot of bad. We can't do video visits with vascular patients doing well that live 100 miles away. You know, why would you bring them in to say, you look good, you know, to do it? We do need to improve those from out of state to make it happen. But we've done a lot of different things that we didn't think we could. But now we can figure out what's the best way to do this. We moved surgeries all over our system into outpatient arenas of that. I'm sure you did too. Many of them said we couldn't teach or train those in those areas and said, well, we have to. So how can we dress and make this better so you don't do it like you always did? So through this changing, you are the best people to engage a team to reimagine the new normal. You do that every day in the OR, in your clinics, wherever you are. You need to identify role models of resistance and show out people that have done incredible through this of people on your team. And it is going to be a challenge, but it's a great opportunity to say, okay, how can we be better in what we do? How can I be happy in my practice? How can I make this better for the next generation? And then connecting to bigger values and purpose. This whole thing with abuse of atherectomy and intervention and all of that, and Bill's so right. You know, we're just human. You know, we're just trying to make our lives and our family's life better to do it. But there's a bigger purpose here. And you know, my dad and mom both had vascular disease. They both were smokers. And many of you have heard me talk about my mom's 6.7 centimeter aneurysm that was diagnosed when she was in a CT scanner for back pain. And she was in Decatur, Illinois, and I was in Hopkins, so we flew her out. And of course, she had a short angulated neck full of clot, and she had to have it done open. And of course, they got into her iliac vein. And of course, she went into AFib and all this, but we finally got her through all of that. Don't worry, my aorta is 1.7, so I'm good. My one brother has some dilatation. My other brother won't get imaged, but those are families. But my dad was a claudicator. So he claudicated back in when he was 50 and 60 years old. I examined his abdomen all the time for an aneurysm, never examined my mother's. Of course, why would I do that? But she was the one with the disease. And he claudicated for years till he was about 87. He ended up moving to Georgia after my mom died a year and a half after her aneurysm because of a stroke, probably due to amyloid vasculitis. But he lived up and coming and then lived in Decatur, right across the street from the VA. And he claudicated, but when he was 87, he called me, he said, you know, there's something wrong with my big toe. I think I need to go see a dermatologist. I go, no, I think you got rest pain. So he came to Emory and they tried to dilate him in with extensive disease. So he had an above knee fent pop by Dr. Dotson, and it was good for 2 years. And then it went down one night. He didn't really notice. And he ended up having to have an above knee amputation at age 89. And he decided after he left the hospital, came back, bad lungs, that he really was done. You know, he didn't want to live with one leg. So we hospiced him. And as he was in hospice, he goes, Julie, why didn't you do this bypass 30 years ago for me? He's classic. Of course we didn't, because he didn't need it for 30 years. And I'm going to write that up because I think he's actually a really good example why you do what you do with a person like my dad, is because he lived just fine for 30 years before he had lost his leg. And we do need to care for each other. So I'm going to tell you to say yes to any opportunity you can when you go home. Figure out where you can have impact in your OR, your OBL, your practice, your kids' school, your community. Everybody needs help. Again, there's Ashley and I operating in the middle. We're digging a hole for our new critical care tower. Because with our partnership with this Atrium thing that we did, I got $3.5 billion for my healthcare system. We're building new ORs. We're building a new ED that we wanted for 25 years, a new eye center. I got endowment for research. I got endowment for startup funds, new pediatric clinic, all of that because we became a bigger system because we're small in Winston-Salem, a few 100,000 people. And we keep that star present so we always do the right thing. Now, this book on scientific evidence that caring makes a difference by Trezek and Mazzarella says that it only takes 40 seconds for you with your conversation with your patient to make a difference. And that's great for us because we only have 40 seconds, right? We're fast. We sit, go, hit and run. But 40 seconds where you sit down, and you say, I'm going to bypass your leg. I'm going to do your carotid, your aorta's rupture. We're going to do the best we can. Whatever it means, 40 seconds. And we do that so well because you look right in their face and you make a difference. The one patient I talked about in my presidential address was that ruptured aneurysm patient from Boston that came down for a Boston Red Sox game because he couldn't get tickets in Boston. So he came to Baltimore to see it ruptured. And actually the Boston vascular surgeons were a little bit irritated that I brought him to the stage because I saved his life. They didn't. They sort of missed the aneurysm on the ultrasound. But anyway, but here we were, and he remembers that 40 seconds when I looked him right in the face and said, we're going to do the best we can for you. And he went to sleep saying, you're going to do the best you can for me. So do that every day. And the last book I want to tell you about is by Steve Magnus. And he's an athlete. But it's called Do Hard Things, Why We Get Resilience Wrong and the Surprising Science of Real Toughness. Now, I was raised where it was every other night in house, 110 hours a week. It was crazy. We did lots of operations on our own. It was a different world. And many of us turned out okay, but a lot of us didn't. There were a lot of drug issues, alcohol issues, suicides. It was tough. It still are in the training parameter. But instead of being that toughness where I'm doing it to you, you need to get that from inside. You need to lean in and pay attention and create this thoughtful action, which you do every time you set up, how am I going to do that endograft or that amazing vision we saw yesterday with that fenestration? I don't think I could do that if I tried. Okay, I was like, where the hell is he? But he's doing it fabulous. You do that every day about how you take it. So do it for yourself, where you navigate your discomfort wherever you are, because your practice plan, your reimbursement, oh my God, there's another damn new CEO, whatever that is, that you can actually make a best decision for where you're going in your practice. And what he looks at is 4 pillars. And that's what's so good about us surgeons. I just want 4 things to do, Julie. I don't need 10, right, to do it. Ditch the facade, embrace the reality, tell the truth. Don't complain. Like Bill said, just say, tell the truth. This is what's going on. This is where my life is. And what do I want to do and how do I make it better? Listen to your body about how you're feeling. Be happy. You've heard us say that a lot. Make sure you're happy in your practice. And instead of reacting, which many people do, We respond to vascular emergencies. You don't react. If you reacted, you would go crazy and you wouldn't fix it. You respond. You quickly analyze what you can and cannot do, what you got, what you can't have, how sick is that patient, what you can do. And then you transcend that discomfort. I actually have told my CEO the difference between mergers and acquisitions and surgeons are that mergers and acquisitions, they assume 95% of them are going to fail, and they do. So they go fast and furious. They maybe don't tell the truth all the time. They make this happen. They go behind closed doors. They make it, and then all of a sudden there's a deal, right? Well, I told them, when I go in the OR, I don't think it's going to fail, right? I mean, we go full of hope. We are positive. I can do this distal bypass. I'm going to save you from this ruptured aneurysm. And only when it takes a turn do we pivot, right? And go plan B. But most times we're hopeful to make that happen. And therefore, as I approach things, I look at it positive, especially when you're training that new generation. You want to be hopeful. You don't want to tell them all the reasons not to be a surgeon. You want to tell them how it's amazing to be a surgeon. Maybe not every day, every hour, every minute, but how lucky we are. And so instead, to do that, you want to create a space to work through challenges. You want to have calm conversations, which you do to make it happen. You want to run an OR that isn't calamity. You want to focus on what matters. You want to keep your mind steady. And you do have to be flexible. You do have to adapt. And you have to bounce up because things are going to be different. We saw that with Bill's talk. Not only is it going to be different, it's probably going to be fast and furious different as we go forward. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about women for a second. When we look at where the women in vascular surgery, we're doing better, especially with the 0-5. But as you can see, only 15% of us are vascular surgeons, 30% residents. The 0-5 is better, but we're not leading. Okay, we're not the program directors. We're not the division chiefs. We're not on the editorial board. When I was the division chief at UCLA, I was the only woman division chief in the country. I was only one of 4 chairs of surgery at Hopkins in 2003 to do that. And I've been the only president of the SVS. And so as we go forward, we need to let those that are different help lead us. It helps us with diversity of fairness and also helps us with our patients. There's a Annals of Vascular Surgery just came out this month, which all the articles are written by women. I wrote the introduction about how a difference of 43 years make, looking at diversity, how diversity is so good for all of us. In diversity, there's a beauty and there is a strength. And I think we embrace it every single day. We see it in this crowd here. And I think with Arun's pointing out too, where Wes Moore was with that, I think that's why I ended up training at UCLA, because they had just finished their first woman chief resident. And I didn't realize how impactful that was in 1979. Margie Fine finished. It wasn't like she started, she finished, where in many places, such as Duke, they had never had a woman resident at all. And so that really made a difference as I finished there only as the 6th woman. And then I was the only 6th woman ever to get her vascular certificate. So we've come a long way, but we've got some ways to go. And with your inclusive leadership, everyone, everywhere you go, take somebody with you, whether it's the 22-year-old or the high school student or the med student. And Bill is so right. They love you. They look at you like you're brilliant and smart, unlike your kids that go, oh no, not a chance, mom. But they're great. They're there and they want to be you so bad. And it actually will make you feel incredible having this new generation around you. And they actually are the future, and you need them in because it's their future, really not yours anymore. So this is Jacob. He's the one that did the video yesterday. Jacob is a first-year med student at Penn. His mom was our chair of dermatology at our place, and he's incredibly smart, just a great leader, great writer to make it happen. And I loved him a lot because he's the right height. So when you would operate with him, he would be, I wouldn't have to be on 2 stools. That's just great to do it. In the middle is Lauren West Livingston. She's an MD PhD from Wake, who's in the 0-5 vascular program at Duke. Her husband's a PhD and she's had 2 children along with getting her MD PhD and being a resident And on the left are a group of women surgeons from Wake, as we were finally getting together to talk about things after COVID to make it happen. And when you look at this is the reason I come to work every day. He just passed his genetics course. He texts me how he's doing. Lauren, I had dinner with when she came back to Winston. She's in her second year, going to spend a couple years in the lab. It's just really great to see these individuals go forward and make an incredible difference and make an incredible impact. And all of you can do it. You can go and get involved. You're extremely brilliant. You're creative. You pivot all the time with your practice and how you take care of patients. And you certainly can do that as you go forward with the institutions, because they're going to undergo huge change too. We're hoping to keep the money in the system so you don't get a pay cut, to do it. We really need to look at how we're going to get reimbursed. How are we going to make this happen? How do we do appropriate intervention? And how do we take care of those patients so they will call you from the Upper Peninsula and say, hey, Dr. Freischlag, this guy says, to do it. And that makes you feel so good and so committed to those patients. So leadership is not a journey to rise in the ranks. I got lots of titles, and every year at Wake, I've had a new title. I've been CEO, I've been dean, I'm CAO, I'm executive vice president. I got all sorts of stuff that they say is my title. But what really I think I've done is made a difference in how we've led and grown and sustained. I have a new dean now that I just hired, Ebony Boulware, who's an African-American woman from Duke. I have a new president now. My new head of our cancer center is Ruben Mesa, who originally is from Cuba. It's a journey to help us, those around you, rise to make it happen. And I'm just lucky that I have these amazing people, the next generation coming, so I can move out of the way so they can make it even better than I ever did. So thank you very much for allowing me to share my thoughts, and it's been a great meeting. Thanks.
Dr. Freischlag, diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act. And we just really appreciate the inclusive leadership that you've demonstrated throughout your career. So next we have Dr. Ben Pierce. He is the program director of the vascular training programs at UAB and also the William D. Jordan Jr. Endowed Professor of Vascular Surgery at UAB. He will be speaking with us this morning about thoughts on the future of the vascular workforce.
Thank you, Illuminate. So hopefully this will just be a nice way to summarize. All the stuff we've heard this morning has been exactly spot on and what we all need to know and hear as we go forth and we do our jobs and work with patients and we recruit and train the surgeons of the future. I'm very fortunate. The bulk of my academic career really revolves around recruitment and training of the next generation of surgeons. Education is what my passion is, and it's what has defined my academic interests. I'm normally asked to speak specifically to really education issues, but when, right now where we're at, I think we all know, and this sort of sets the stage, we're all concerned about where we're going as a specialty, right? This update on the future of the workforce that came out showed the surgeons are going to be the biggest deficit in this country, and actually vascular surgeons are believed to be the most significantly needed as we go forward. This was updated again more recently, and things haven't changed. But more importantly, and we've talked about this at the meeting, just in passing with each other, and we've heard about it touched on many of the talks, including Dr. Cherview's speech yesterday, the presidential address. There's a lot of controversies in vascular surgery right now, and we need to pull together. We look like our pecuniary interests are taking over our fiduciary, and I think that that's a real problem in messaging. And the trainees, and I'll get back to the trainees in the future because that, again, is my interest. But the trainees need to hear the message from us. And I think, like I said, the talks already this morning have set the stage for that. Dr. Freischlag said it exactly right. We are the future, and the way we attack our patients and our practices and the problems we have, I think, are how we can get past these sorts of controversies. In fact, when I was putting this together earlier this week, I actually thought about a patient I treated recently, because there's a lot that vascular surgeons actually can do, right? And it goes beyond just this site of service problem that we're having. Everything's going to go outpatient. Dr. Schneider pointed that out earlier, right? Things that keep people out of the hospital are what's best for them, but we're needed everywhere. And so we don't have a site of service problem. We really have an epistemic problem, and we can do things. This is a patient that was a phone call I got about 6 o'clock at night. I was actually picking my son up from cross-country practice, and I got a phone call. There was a gentleman earlier that morning, almost 12 hours prior, who had undergone a lap nephrectomy at a hospital about an hour and a half away. And he just wasn't acting right. They actually were going to discharge him home, believe it or not. That's their protocol. He had a renal cell cancer, and he got to get a lap nephrectomies and go home the same day. Again, outpatient, the more you do get people out of the hospital, the safer they are. And he just wasn't, they said he wasn't looking right. He wasn't acting right. Nobody examined him. Nobody felt his legs. They just ordered a CAT scan. After the CAT scan was done, they sent a lactate, and of course it was about 8. And they emergently called a vascular surgeon locally who is near retirement, and he called me and said, "Listen, this is a bad problem. Nobody down here can take care of this." And so they sent him up to us, and we emergently took him to the operating room. So what we found was, you saw that CAT scan. This patient had essentially a tangential staple line that went across the origin of the SMA. The SMA, you could see, had a little bit of flow in it, but the celiac artery was completely occluded. There was a second sort of suture line that created like a backward 7. And it incorporated the left crucis of the diaphragm in the aorta as it came through the hiatus. And the patient was having, diarrhea. He was having ischemic colitis. He had pulseless extremities. His lactate was elevated, tachycardic, and all the usual things. So we took this guy that's emerged in the OR, put him up on his side, replaced his aorta, was able to bevel it so that we could incorporate the SMA in his remaining renal artery without any difficulty. And then we did a junk graft to his celiac, and he did great. And afterwards, my chief resident who was doing the case with me, she's terrific. She's like, "Who would have done this if we weren't here?" And I said, "Nobody." The trauma surgeons can't do this. The heart surgeons actually can't do this. Vascular surgeons are the only people that can do this, and we're going to continue to be that. So remember our need. We need to remember too that our disease process is probably the most overriding problem in this country. If you look within the lifetime of one of our current medical students, right? This is a very short span, but just in the lifetime of one of our current first-year med students, the diabetes epidemic is just raged through this country. And if you specifically germane to this group, right? If you think about it as sort of an earthquake, the American South is the epicenter of this new pandemic. And it's true of all kinds of things, right? Diabetes, heart disease, and cardiovascular disease, same thing, right? Look at that red. It's all concentrated here in the American Southeast. Cigarette use, still a problem. Most of us think, we don't go to bars and smoke anymore, but people still smoke. I keep this one in here, not because it's really that germane to any talk, but it just cracks me up. This was a study somebody did to look at what states want to quit smoking. And Alabama was the one that had the least number of anti-smoking campaigns. So again, it's good to be a surgeon in Birmingham if you're doing vascular disease. What else do we do, right? We all know that we're the fire people of the hospital, but I also would argue that we're also the police of the SFA. And I think that needs to get back to a lot of these current controversies, right? The messaging needs to be consistent, that we know what's right for patients, and we know how to take care of these patients, and we know the natural history. Our problem is not a site of service problem. Our problem is a credentialing problem. And like I said, it's an epistemic problem. And all of us as a society getting together and agreeing on what the right thing to do is. We know what the right thing to do is. We have scientific sessions all the time that show how to take care of these problems. We can't get together as a society and do it. And so I think vascular surgeons are uniquely poised going forward. And so I think recruiting should be easy for us. We do all these things for the hospital. And there's data behind it. This is actually our UAB data, but we looked at just iatrogenic line complications in our hospital. And I think this is going to be another growing problem because I think people are less and less trained on it. And there are people who are non-interventionalists doing a lot of the lines and the access in the hospitals, as was pointed out earlier this morning. We had about 209 cases over an 8-year period that we had to intervene on. We were able to do that pretty successfully, but we actually had some patients lose a leg or have a stroke because of it. But we were successful in fixing the majority of these problems. And they need us for those sorts of things. If you save a bunch of legs or prevent strokes from carotid lines, what are you doing for the hospital system? It's impossible to know, because if you go and you actually try to find out the data on how much money you might save per incidence, there's no consistent thing, right? That's another thing I think we have a problem with in this country is we can't come together and decide what's a reasonable amount. But on average, it looks like it's about somewhere between $50,000 and $30,000 per episode of limb loss. So if you look at it and you say that there were 190 end organs saved in an 8-year period in one hospital system, and you start doing the math, vascular surgeons become valuable even for things that are potential problems. We provide a lot of consultation, and we provide consultation at awkward times. And again, I think this is something that's unique to our specialty. I don't know as I've crested 50 and I'm moving towards being older, I have to say that the after hours thing is a real problem for me. It's much harder than it was when I was younger, but we're still there. We get up and we make it happen. It's not so much that night, it's the next day that beats me up personally. But we have data that shows what we're doing. This was, again, our data. Tom, who's in the audience, put this paper together when he was still at UAB with Dr. Jerton. But we do after hours consultation. These are usually for things that are really important, right? Acute limb ischemia, aortic things, and these injuries that we see. We actually found that our colleagues out in the community, both vascular surgeons and ER doctors, actually do a really good job of identifying problems. We get more non-operative consults from our own hospital. If patients get transferred to our hospital, they almost always need surgery. More than 2/3 of them need surgery. So that's another thing. We got to keep people out of the hospital so we can get transfers in on the patients that need diseases. So again, don't be focused on the side of service. Let's be focused on what we can do to help patients. Trauma is another thing, right? Trauma is a vascular disease now. Whether we like it or not, no matter how much those of us who are old and trained in trauma centers where we did everything when we were the trauma resident, that is not the reality in the modern medical community. So this is a paper that Dr. Starnes' group put out that just showed that their 10-year trend was to have an over 500% increase in the trauma cases that were treated in their hospital. I got our trauma folks to send me this number. This is depressing. There's been a doubling of the number of gunshot wounds treated at UAB Hospital from 2013 to 2022. I actually, in previous talks, had a slide that was a little older, and this is a trend that hasn't stopped. The preceding decade, we had the same thing. We had a doubling. So when I first came to UAB as a fellow, we probably only had to treat about, as an institution, about 180 gunshot wounds, so maybe one every other day. Now we're treating 1,300 gunshot wounds in a year. So we're treating, 4 a day. This is devastating. And these are surgical problems that require a vascular surgeon. Control of bleeding is now the domain of vascular surgeons. So we have a bright future. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind as we do our recruiting. So I will get to a little bit about the academic side of it now from the work that we do at the APDVS. So everybody knows, right, this shortage was coming, and vascular surgery, because we're adept, Dr. Freischlag just framed it for us perfectly. Because we're adept at being able to adapt to our things. We've adapted to endovascular therapy. Dr. Quinones showed that excellent, right? Like that's what we do, is we adapt and we learn new things. Because of that, we said we've got to change the way we're training patients. And so, or training, residents. So we started out with the 05, and it rapidly grew. Now, interestingly, it sort of stagnated for us. This was just the actual number of programs. From about 2014 to about 2019, there wasn't a big change. So this again shows how we can have a positive impact in a very short time period. So we sort of stagnated. And then there were some real specific efforts that came through the APDVS and the board. And we actually have increased the training programs now in the last 4 years. Again, sort of a dramatic increase. And this is actually translated into some real success with recruitment, and meetings like this and your student scholarship are paramount to that. So at that same time, we had kind of stagnated programs. Our applications actually had sort of stagnated as well. You can actually see in 2019, we had less U.S. medical students applying than we had positions we were offering. This was a real problem. And so again, we made this a focus of the APDVS starting that year. Dr. Jordan was the president, and he actually put Dr. Coleman and myself in charge of this recruiting effort. And if you look now at the last full match data I had when I was putting this together, now we're back up to having more, 16 more just U.S. applicants, U.S. senior medical applicants than we had spots. So in a short period of time, you can make a big difference. And again, it's efforts like what you're doing here with your meeting that make a big difference. The other good news is if you don't have a training program at your institution, but you had the business for it, you enjoy having them, now is the time to go for it. when they came through with the most recent Shortage Reduction Act, it was a bipartisan effort in Congress that's been passed. They actually increased funding for GME. So at a big institution like ours, we capped our GME funding eons ago. And so any new resident we add actually costs the hospital money. But if you don't have a cap on your GME yet, you actually get reimbursed from HCFA and from CMS for having trainees. That funding is increasing. And if you look at the financials of what a really great resident can do versus what you pay in an FTE for an APP, no offense to the APPs in the room, it's staggering, right? The amount of work you can get from a surgery resident, especially if it's being subsidized by the government. So I strongly encourage folks, if you don't have a program in this room, that it's things that you can do. If you don't have a general surgery residency at your institution, you can still get a fellowship, and that's still a viable means. So we've increased all this thing. How is that affecting the workforce and what's happening? We still have a little bit, believe it or not, a little bit of bias against the O5 program actually in practice. And I think this is it continues to organically improve, but there are some data that show that folks are still a little bit less likely to hire O5. And again, I think that's going to continue to change. And that's mainly because the people that are applying now, like these are super smart people. You should read the applications. The single number one thing you hear every year is, man, I would not get into residency if I was applying right now. And this is true. I'm certain I wouldn't. These are smart kids. They're accomplished, and they're gonna make us better going forward. When it comes to their experience, a few of you in the room have seen this before, so you have to indulge me because it's still just it's just amazing to me. But I have access to a lot of the UAB data, pretty granular, so I can look at the case logs. And so there was a really bright, young, handsome fellow that came to UAB in 2007 and graduated in 2009. And I'll say this again: if you want to know what 15 years of practicing for Will Jordan does to a person, look at the change. But you know, listen, I had a great fellowship. We did about 900 index cases in 2 years. 84 open abdominal cases, peripheral EVARs. I did 100 EVARs, right? Like what a great time that was. So now we offer both. We graduate a fellow and a resident. So let's say 2015 was the first year that we had matured our residency. We were graduating people. So their numbers really weren't that much different. They definitely had a little decline in the fellows numbers for open abdominal, but their endovascular was actually up just because of the nature of our practice. Look at the O5 resident this year. Their endovascular interventions, like lower extremity disease treatment, like far outstripped anything I ever would have done. Okay. And maybe that was a fluke. Well, no, 2017, we see the same thing. They still have very good numbers for open abdominal cases, open aneurysms, EVARs, but their peripheral experience continues to be staggering. 687 diagnostic, 236, because they're in the program for 5 years. We can put a second-year vascular surgery resident in the angio room and they can start doing leg cases. And they do leg cases for 4 years, right? I did it as a fellow, kind of like on my off time when we weren't, fixing aneurysms and high-fiving. And this has persisted even for our 2022 residents. So we see a little bit overall decrease in the fellows numbers, but they actually do a little bit more endo now too. But overall, they're still doing way above the national average at our institution because the American South has the disease. For our O5 residents, these folks are really graduating with incredible numbers in lower extremity intervention. So if your practice is mostly based in PAD work, I would say these are the kids you need to be looking for. They come out ready to go. And what we're training them, again, vascular surgeons, we sort of find the way to do the right thing on our own. If you just leave us alone, we'll actually make it happen. Because the way we're training them is actually mirroring the trends in treatments, right? So most of what people do is endovascular intervention for PAD. Similarly, aneurysm repairs, right? When I started my residency in 2000, only about 5% were done by EVAR. And now, as you know, 74% a decade later, and now it's even more, it's about 83%. So what we're teaching them to do, people were freaking out, right, about these open numbers, but that's not what they need to do. This is the actual reality of a practice is they need to be able to do endovascular surgery, and we're doing that for them. We talked a little bit about open repair yesterday. It just showed that for EVAR, there actually isn't a real relationship between the outcomes in patients and people who have training with EVAR or not, but the open repair, it certainly does matter. And that's why I think select centers will continue to be will be focused on for open engine repair, but the most of them really don't need to. We don't need to worry about those numbers. This is a study that just shows, this was one that was a VQI study. I just think it's really fascinating. They went and looked at our kind of big disease processes, and they actually looked at the surgeon of record and whether they were trained in an O5 program or in a traditional fellowship, and showed that the outcomes at 1 year, because that's the limitation of the VQI, outcomes in 1 year were actually equivalent between the folks trained. So no difference in real world outcomes. So I would just argue that if you're hiring here in the room, the O5 residency is a really viable way. Both programs are really viable. Just at the very end, I want to touch a little bit on recruiting, because again, things like the medical student program here and other places are what's going to make the difference in the future. There's lots of regional and again, state society meetings that have events designed specifically for medical students. We are collating that at choosevascular.com through a sort of an intersocietal consortium called Covers. Guillermo has actually been a real integral part of that. If there's a really bright young person in the room that knows anything about HTML and can help me, I'm trying to make the website, put all these different meeting things into some sort of format that program directors can go to, students can go to, and residents can go to see where their education, and it's an evolution, but we're trying our best to try to get people to these things. Again, the APDVS, we've actually started a scholarship. If you need money for a VSIG, for a student interest group, or you want to have like a regional recruiting meeting, we have tools to help you with that. We really encourage people to do symposia or events like your med student program here, specifically designed for students, because the modern learner needs things that are designed for them. And why do we have to do all this? Why do all of us in the room have to do this? Well, it's because there's a huge boon, and you guys probably know this, there's a huge boon in medical applications right now. There were almost 1 million applications to allopathic medical schools for the last year that we have full data on it. About 55,000 unique people applying to allopathic medical school. But only 112 of those 155 actually have any vascular training programs or formal vascular curricula. So these are kids that are not getting touched by the vascular community. And a lot of you all in this room, when you have students in your community practice, you're the ones doing that work, and it needs to continue. Similarly, there's been a huge rise in DO school applications, right? As medical schools has gotten harder to get into from the allopathic standpoint, the osteopathic routes become much more attractive. They had a similar huge number of applications last year. There are no vascular programs at osteopathic schools. So all of those students have to come into your practice. And I think a lot of you in this room, again, host osteopathic medical students and have been mentoring them. And that is needed to be continued. It's pretty easy to do. This is one that Dawn did before she left Michigan, specifically for women. We do one at the Alabama Vascular Society where we do a symposium. Again, the modern learner likes things that are devoted just to them. They want your attention. They want mentorship. They're actually asking for it. And Dr. Freischlag showed that in her last one. And then it ends up being kind of fun, right? You can do it with simple panels. We do little simple suturing graph to graph type events together. They're never too young to start. This was probably our best at the Southern last year. I think he was the winner of the sub 14 endovascular skills competition. Much like Dr. Jordan and I won and Jerry won the golf yesterday. There are opportunities again, too. The other thing is, and I won't go much on this because again, Dr. Freischlag just talked about it, but if you leave vascular surgeons alone to fix a problem, they start to fix it. There have definitely been underrepresentation of women and minorities in the surgical specialties and in vascular surgery, but you can see that the vascular residencies are doing a better job of incorporating women and minorities in. We have more people that are training and we're getting better people in. Anecdotally, we've seen that this was sort of the UAB. We kind of had the classic wall of white guys when you looked at the training program back when I was in the training program. And I'm happy to say that we're changing, and Emory, you can see the same thing. We're changing to meet the needs of the future. And these are all incredible young people, irrespective of their backgrounds. We're grateful for all of them. So these efforts that we all do are making a difference. We're getting people in actually on those sort of work shortages, workforce prediction things. Vascular surgery actually is one of the better ones now. It looks like we may be catching up according to most recent data. So all these efforts and all your efforts are making a big difference. So I just will leave you with the thoughts that recruiting high quality med students is paramount to the future, especially for vascular surgery. The modern learner is really motivated by achievement and affiliation. They're actually not as motivated by pecuniary interests. So I think some of these controversies we're worried about now may actually take care of themselves as the next generation takes over from us. The integrated training pathway actually provides some unique opportunities, professional development time, a lot more exposure to the vascular pathology. And I think more of a teamwork too, more of an esprit de corps, because they're in vascular from the beginning. These targeted recruiting efforts can have a positive influence, and it can be done in very short time. Like I said, in 4 years of matches, the vascular community has made a huge difference in the recruitment, and it's incredible. Like I said, we've embraced the rise of endovascular therapy in our practice, right? 20 years ago, nobody could look at a CAT scan and immediately figure out whether they could put an endograft in somebody or they needed an open repair. We do that every day, and we do it quickly. I think we just have to rethink the way that we've looked at talent and what we're looking for in our future trainees. And this is actually an opportunity. And I think that the recruitment, the future workforce are going to be the thing that's going to solve a lot of these sort of controversies that we currently have. So we'll leave you with that. I owe so much thanks to all of our trainees that I've been grateful to be the program director for, my co-faculty, the folks in the room for the invitation, and then my colleagues, the APDVS, who work on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'm speaking for everyone when I say this has been a action-packed and thoughtful session. I wonder if I could get all the invited speakers up behind us. We ran just a little late, but it was worth it. I think the strategy would be to shorten the break shortly, because I think there's some ideas we can talk about in the next few minutes that will be helpful for all of us. I would remind you also, the Slido application, please, if you have some questions and you don't want to stand at a microphone, it'd be very efficient to go ahead and put them in and we can discuss them.
So as you guys are getting settled back there, our first question is, how do we police the use of endovascular technology within our specialty, or should we?
We can probably go down the line and
Policing endovascular intervention, I think that we have I think it's a credentialing problem. We have people who do not understand the natural history of disease and only understand the application of technology doing these things. Unfortunately, it's going to take our society, I think, embracing the fact that sometimes you need an overriding body to look at what's good for the whole population. And that's a struggle for our society right now, not just the medical community. These things keep me up at night. I don't have a good answer for that one. That's probably a better question for Dr. Preislog. I'll put you on the spot.
Well, I think, we hear, when I was in California, we had huge issues with prior authorization really back in the 90s. I mean, to get an MRI, you'd have to wait a week or two sometimes to get it. So I hear that many people are having pre-authorization issues, and I don't think that's the way to police it, or to have you do a diagnostic angio. I mean, what's that to do it? I think one thing, if you're in a bigger system, is these service lines really help. I mean, if we have a really powerful service line, we have a Department of Vascular Surgery, Department of Cardiac, and cardiology sits in medicine, and they do all work together. They have transparency. They talk their morbidity and mortality together. The issue is a lot of this is outpatient now. So you're not going to hear perhaps of what went wrong or what didn't even happen, where they made it happen. But I think wherever you are, if you can try to get whoever's practicing to talk to you about their interventions and to talk about it. If you have trainees in the room, oh boy, everything gets pretty legitimized, because they go, why are you doing that, to do it? So having trainees actually, or a program, I think actually makes you justify whatever you do to make it happen. But for those of you in small rural areas or practice, I think it's hard because people come to town, they sort of take the patients that can pay, and all of a sudden the ones that can't pay are too difficult for them to treat. I mean, we know this. We have some of those practices in our town, but I think transparency, if you're in a community, go out and be that community leader, go talk to the clubs and the retirement homes and talk to them about that. I go out to our retirement homes and talk about what opportunities we have and really be part of the community. I think if you're in a smaller space so that they know you're the trusted person, but I think it's hard.
Yeah, all good points. I'll just add a little bit to it. One is, we're very aware of differences between ourselves and other specialties, and also even within our specialty, site of service and these kind of things are really apparent. And we're splitters in that way. We're splitters by nature. We're very proud of what we do and we have our established scope. But everybody else out there, the regulatory people, the folks that pay the bills, they're all lumpers. And the more internecine warfare that we have, the more likelihood is that the hammer falls on all of us. And the way they control this in just about all of the other 179 countries in the world is they just don't pay for anything. And we're in this luxurious situation where we're still getting paid for doing things. And I think it's super important that this be addressed. And then the last thing I'll just say is that the person that did the most egregious activity that's ever been reported that I've seen was in ProPublica, and it was a vascular surgeon in the mid-Atlantic area who was even doing things like billing for things when he was out of the country. And probably some of you have seen that article. It puts the New York Times article to shame, honestly, in terms of the salaciousness of it and the whole thing. And so I don't think anybody's immune. And I think the sooner we get this organized, the better.
Well, I agree with all those comments. I think vascular surgeons are probably the least guilty of this issue. I think most vascular surgeons practices are with colleagues, and I think they keep each other real in terms of what they do. There are a few that are outliers. I think unfortunately, I think the way to sort of do this is to monitor it. And if you have someone that bills for, that bills $10 million a year and 80% of it is atherectomies, I think whoever the payer is should take a look at it and at least analyze the indications and the results. I think that is one way, is to monitor what everybody's doing, and it shouldn't be that difficult in the digital age to be able to do that. I think vascular surgeons are better at that. They're, like I said, they're always outliers, but I think the way to do it is to monitor, because a lot of the reasons why this is being done is financial. It's just the way it is.
I'm going to move to a question that one of you asked and expand on it a little bit, if I may. There's a question from the audience about what the role of social media is in vascular surgery, and I'd like to expand on it a little bit for all of you to comment. When I was a fellow, we realized that we had an inability to project to our patients who we were nationally. And if you ask most people, even today, who should I go to for my leg or my carotid or my aorta, they'll often think it's a cardiologist. We also face headwinds, I think, with Google, for example. How do the answers come the way they do when we ask them? So I just wonder, all of you, do you have some innovative strategies? We're a small population compared to the American College of Cardiology. What are some strategies we might do to raise patient awareness so that hopefully they find their way to what we believe are the correct specialties?
So I'd like to just start trying to answer, I'll answer the question on the screen by saying, we talk about this a lot too. Mal was here last year, as you all recall. We both agree that if you're bad at social media, you shouldn't do it. And that most of us are bad at social media. And again, I think this is where we're going to rely on the sort of innovative spirit of the next generation of vascular surgeons to help us to do this better, but we do not do a good job with it. So if you're not good at it, don't do it, I think is my advice on that. In regards to your question about brand, let's call it branding, right? This is something every vascular surgeon I've ever met has the same complaint. The SVS has made several efforts. We made a lot of headway initially with a campaign with a company, you know, many of the people in the room probably have been a part of this. There's a great branding toolkit that you can give for patients and to referring docs, and nobody uses it. I just happen to be a little bit bitter about it because I spent a lot of time making a lot of those flyers with Joe and a lot of the people in the room. But there are some of those things, but the reality of it is we're too small. We can't do this in little bitty or, you know, like small siloed type efforts. My personal feeling, so if you ever get the ear, of anybody on the executive committee of SVS, nobody knows who we are. I think the best way to do that is to partner with something much bigger entity. Everybody knows who the American Dental Association is because they've lended their name to Crest toothpaste and everything else for years. The American Heart Association is on boxes of Cheerios. The American Lung Association had all those commercials for smoking, and now people know who they are. I think we should go to Garmin and we should go to Fitbit, and we should be the people that endorse walking as the treatment and prevention of most vascular disease. And it should be the SVS and vascular surgeons. That's my own personal take. I don't know how to make that happen. So maybe there's some people in the room that have more connections than me, but that's my personal.
And we do it as an academic center. We put out, you know, publications, things we've done. I actually think the walking has been out there quite a bit this time to do it. I'm on social media just so that students see us. The other thing we talked about, we're looking at training programs because we've been so successful with the 0-5 and the American College of Surgeons. We're looking at pediatric surgery. Why do they have to do 5+2? Why can't they do that? Can a general surgeon, if they know in year 3 they want to be a breast surgeon, why do they need to do 2 more years? That kind of stuff. And we found that peer to peer is real important. Social media too, that our residents and fellows, we still have great attrition rates in general surgery and some in vascular, that the peer influence to each other and find. I have a WhatsApp group for women vascular surgeons. She just posted my talk on it today. That has been a really great group for us to talk to each other. So I think it's also useful for support of each other
in terms of how we can optimize or improve that environment, other than just by leading by example. Dr. Pierce, if you don't mind starting.
Thank you very much, Salamine. Yeah, I think that the most important thing is more than ever, feeling included is what young people want. I think it's probably been, I don't have any data to back this up, but it's probably been exacerbated by the loneliness of the pandemic. Most of the med students who are starting residency or applying for residencies this year, when you talk to them, their first 2 years of medical school, they weren't in class and they were isolated. So I think that providing them a team and a home is more important than ever. We've always sort of been team, I think, like being a good teammate, being team oriented, but I would think really giving them a feeling that they belong is a big part of it.
And we do implicit bias training, which is important. Probably the most important training we do is bystander training. So we call it WAKE. I can give it to you. You call it WAKE too, or you can call it something else if you want. But it's really realizing when something happens in that OR where somebody says or does something stupid, makes a bad comment about the patient, tells the woman medical student that you can't be a surgeon because you're going to have kids, or makes a comment about race. And sometimes it can be the patient saying it, the nurse saying it. It's not always the surgeon saying it. If you're the leader of that room and you say nothing, that means that you are supporting that. So you have to figure out a way that you can say something that doesn't disrupt everything, either at the time or afterwards. And that learner, that person needs to know you did something about it. And sometimes, mine is like, what a stupid thing to say. And I'm sure you didn't mean to offend that patient. And then of course he would go, ooh, what did I just say? To do it. I'm very comfortable doing that, but you may not. And hierarchy is big in our specialty to make it happen. And sometimes we do treat that OR, sort of like a sanctuary that we can say and do anything if someone's bleeding. So I think making sure, there's so many articles I've just reviewed this year about harassment of women trainees, men trainees, all trainees. My students are still hearing they shouldn't be a surgeon, to do that, especially if they're female. And I think you can believe anything you want, but don't say it. What you want to do is to be very encouraging to that person to be the best doctor they can be. And you certainly can say this person doesn't look like they should go into a surgery residency later, but you never know, right, to make it happen. And so I do think making sure you as a leader, everybody's watching you. I had a flat tire once at Hopkins, and like 35 people came to my office to tell my secretary it was flat, because they always watch you. They watch what you wear, they watch everything. And I wore black for a year because people watch me. So they hear everything you say, but they also hear what you don't say. So figure out how you're going to say something when those situations arise.
Yeah, wow.
I'm sorry. I just want to say, you just mostly because you made fun of me, but no, I'm teasing. I will say this. It is also important though, if you're mentoring people, we want them all to feel like they can do anything they want. But I have learned over the years that I sit them down and I ask them to really honestly think about who they want to be, who the people that they're like. When they see people in the hospital, they should be honest with themselves, because not everybody can be a vascular surgeon. And the last thing we want is for people to be signed up and to do 4 years of residency and then realize that it's not for them either. All these sessions we do, I do this a lot, are about how to increase the recruitment, increase the pool, because it's critical for us to do that. But we should all also be honest with them. And we can do that by totally being nice and mirroring those incredible behaviors that you just outlined, Dr. Freischlag. But we need to be honest with the young people too, and make sure that they're understanding what they're signing up for, and that this is what they want to do with their life. Sorry.
Yeah, and I agree. I just talked to a guy who's finished his 4th year in an integrated plastic surgery program, and he hates it. Yeah. And he didn't know how to get out of it. Because when you start an integrated program, what the hell do you do next? Some of it was his parents. So if you're parents, to make sure you don't push them too hard. But now I just said, reboot, figure it out. Then you need someone to help you. But he spent 4 years and he didn't like it. He wasn't that good. But 4 years, to do that. So I do agree with you that you need these integrated programs, they're a quandary if it's not right for them. And so we're in general surgery, you could sort of mess with it a little bit more, but we actually need to help them do that.
I was just going to add that, one of the things that we have a unique opportunity to do, and we frequently don't do it as much as we could, is to really let the patient tell their story. And I think the trainees really love that. And so whenever they're asking me anything, I'm always saying, well, what does the patient say about that? Or what does the patient think about that? And to never make a denigrating comment about, oh man, they're calling me again, or this guy kind of did it to himself. You can't, I mean, if anything, I think it's making it super clear every day that the patient is first, that if we don't know something, let's go to the bedside, see if we can figure it out. And what does the patient want? And also the idea of having the patient tell their story. And every time I do that, I say, oh, well, what did you used to do? Or what did you like about that? The trainees love that stuff, and they realize that they can have a future where they're part of these, random people's lives that will show up, and they'll learn something from everybody they talk to.
I think one of the major roles of the principal surgeon in the operating room is to keep the tension as low as possible in that environment. Because if something is said that it's placing one of the members of that team at a different tension level, it's not going to be as good as if everybody's kind of still cohesively united in accomplishing whatever the procedure is. So if it's me that said something appropriate, I apologize right away. And I think that goes a long way to kind of resolve the problem. If it's someone else, it depends on what time during the procedure it happens. If it happens before the procedure, I would pull that person out of the operating room and ask him or her to apologize to the team. If it happens in the middle of the case, I do it right then and there. I say, that wasn't appropriate. And that starts solving the problem. If it happens towards the end of the case, then I'll do it after the case. But I think our role is to keep that operating room as relaxed as possible. Everybody feeling that they're part of a team. We're all doing this together, and they're as important as you are. Trust me. I always told patients, the surgeon is not really the one that makes the difference. It's the support system that does. If you have a good support system, you can get any patient through any case.
Before you ask the last question, I just wanted to say one thing, Dr. Schneider. So I've thought a lot about the humility that you displayed in one of your opening statements about, you're still trying to figure out what your contribution to the field will be. And I think that's a very humble statement, because I think when people ask me I trained at Oregon Health and Sciences where I did my fellowship. And when people ask me who were the people that you trained with, I mentioned, Greg Mineta, different people like that. And I also mentioned your name because of the amount of information that I gleaned from your book. So I think hopefully you can get to the point where you think about what is your greatest contribution to the field.
I appreciate that.
I think we have time for one more, and it occurs to me that I've discovered the cure for burnout. I raise dogs, and the best way to get an old dog faster is get him a puppy. But in that vein, I would ask all of you, if you reflect back, what was the best advice that a mentor gave you in training that really shaped your career? Anyone may start.
Basically, that you can do anything, that you're able, Wes Moore hired me as one of the first year he was there. He had a woman fellow, Carol Graviola. There was no match then. I remember I sort of negotiated out of a year of general surgery too. I've always, I guess, been a negotiator of sorts, but you can do anything you want. Just tell me where you want to go and I can help you. And really gave me the confidence that said I could go do what I wanted to do. But then Busadil told me, he said, did I tell you you're one of the best residents I ever trained? I said, no. He goes, well, I would never tell you that, because then you go to your head. So some of them won't tell you, but other ones will, to make it happen.
Well, I would just say that the best, not so much things that people gave me advice, but just watching the people who were successful, was that every patient encounter, every CAT scan that was looked at was trying to figure out a way to solve the problem, and always be looking at it with an eye on how to solve this problem. And the solution may be different and it may not always work, but you should always be trying to make it better.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add is the best advice I got was that every single person that comes into your life for a reason, and you just have to figure out why.
I think the best advice I received is to make sure you listen to your patient, that you look at your patient and you feel your patient. And I learned that from watching some of the best surgeons and some of the best doctors that I ever encountered. And to realize that every patient is special and they all have a story.
Very insightful responses, and you know, it definitely has played into each of your careers, as we can see. So we're going to go ahead and break for the session, and we'll come back on time for the schedule for the scientific session, which will start at 10:45.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed the.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm not. Yes.
Oh, well, there'll be. There he is.